Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the quiet, red-dusted edges of the Kalahari, where the wind feels ancient and even the silence hums with memory. We're going to learn how grandmothers in southern Africa used goats, not weather maps or barometers, to read the skies. Yeah, I know. It sounds like the plot of a cozy bedtime fable, but these women were dead serious. And spoiler alert, their predictions were often better than your weather apps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean, I'm not trying to guilt you into anything, but do you really want to miss out on how people used animal knees to track rain? And hey, tell me in the comments, what city are you in? And what time is it there right now? I like knowing where you're listening from, even if you're already halfway to dreamland. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off a creaky bus into dust that sticks between your toes. It's late afternoon in the Kalahari, and the air is a kind of dry that almost crackles. A grandmother, you never did catch her name, waves you over. She has a face carved with gentle creases and a rhythm to her walk that makes it seem like she's always moving in slow motion. Beside her trots a goat, one ear flopped over and a limp in its front leg. She doesn't say hello. Instead, she points toward the western sky, squints, and says, "The rain is coming tonight. That goat's been acting strange since morning." At first, you think she's joking, or maybe just guessing. But as the evening stretches out, the breeze changes, the air turns a bit sticky, and by nightfall, the sky groans, and rain does fall. Heavy, forgiving rain that makes the dry earth hiss. You look at the goat. It looks smug. Or maybe that's just your imagination. Turns out, this kind of thing isn't unusual here. In many rural parts of southern Africa, especially among the Zulu, Swana, and Ndebele communities, weather forecasting wasn't a task for scientists. It was an art, a community instinct passed from one wrinkled hand to another, like the way you'd hand down a soup recipe or a family story. And often, the artists were grandmothers. Why grandmothers? Partly because they were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who had watched patterns for decades. And partly because they had the patience to notice the tiniest changes, a goat that bleats more often, a hen refusing to leave its nest, or the smell of dust just before a storm. Of course, not every goat limp or chicken nap meant rain. Even in these communities, people joked about goat false alarms. But more often than not, these little signs meant something. And unlike modern forecasts, these grandmothers didn't have to explain themselves in percentages. They just say, "It's coming," and that was enough. Some historians believe this local knowledge worked because it was holistic. It considered everything: the shape of the clouds, the direction of the wind, the humidity on your skin, the weird way ants suddenly rush in one direction. It wasn't about isolating data points. It was about absorbing the entire world like a sponge and gently wringing out a prediction. Scientists today call this ethnoscience, and while it's hard to measure in charts and graphs, it's getting more respect. There are even weather researchers who now consult with local communities in South Africa and Namibia to understand how traditional indicators can enhance satellite models. You heard that right. Goats are being taken, seriously by science. Still, not everyone agrees. Some meteorologists say these observations are just coincidental or that they romanticize unreliable methods. But others argue that dismissing them too quickly is a form of cultural arrogance, because just because something doesn't beep or flash doesn't mean it's not smart. Back in the village, the grandmother wraps a shawl around her shoulders and mutters something about needing to cover the vegetables before the wind picks up. You glance back at the goat, who is now munching weeds, as if nothing happened, but you swear it gave you a side-eye. You realize that this quiet, observational, deeply personal relationship with nature isn't outdated. It's just slower. And maybe that's the point. You wake up early, earlier than you wanted. The sky is a soft blur of pale peach and lavender, and the village is just starting to stir. You can hear a kettle whistling somewhere, and the low, familiar mutter of chickens announcing the arrival of daylight like gossipy neighbors. Your host, the grandmother from last night, greets you with a warm nod and a plate of mieli pap. No words needed. She gestures for you to sit beside her under the old acacia tree. You oblige, still not entirely awake, and she begins to speak. Not to you, though. To the goat. "Nyabonga," she says softly. "Good call." You glance between them. Is this a joke? A tradition? A prayer? It's none of those. It's a ritual. A small act of gratitude passed through generations. Because in this village, predicting rain wasn't just clever. It could mean life or hardship. It affected planting, travel, even community gatherings. And the rain that came last night, that meant tomorrow seeds go in the ground. This is your introduction to the world of oral weather keeping, a kind of meteorological folklore that travels not by book, but by mouth. And the storytellers, usually elderly women, respected not only for what they remembered, but for how they interpreted signs with uncanny intuition. You listen, sipping some warm rooibos tea, as she tells you how she learned it all. When she was 5, her grandmother made her sit under the same tree and watch the clouds every afternoon after chores. No distractions, just sky watching. She learned the difference between clouds that puffed upward with harmless vanity and the ones that curled like angry fists. Later, she was taught the smell test, that smell before a storm, the kind that smells like stone, dust, and something vaguely electric, was called Zulu elisondalayo, or the rain approaching. Her grandmother would scoop a pinch of dry dirt, crush it in her hands, and say, "When it smells like this, go fetch the buckets." That's how the knowledge passed down. Casually, gently, with no charts or rules, just rhythm and repetition. Over time, the skills became reflexes. You ask her whether she still trusts these signs in the age of smartphones and weather alerts. She chuckles, shaking her head. The radio lies sometimes. The goat? Never. Is that scientifically accurate? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Several studies have actually looked at animal behavior before rain, especially goats, sheep, and dogs. The science is still foggy, but the idea is that some animals react to changes in atmospheric pressure or smell shifts in ozone levels. While not conclusive, there's enough evidence to keep researchers curious and to keep grandmothers confidently pointing at clouds. Still, some anthropologists argue that we shouldn't try to squeeze this folk knowledge into Western scientific boxes. It's like trying to decode poetry with a calculator. What makes these predictions powerful is not just accuracy, but the trust and attention behind them. They're rituals of care built on years of watching, noticing, and remembering. You take another bite of pap and realize when you stare at the sky without checking your phone, you actually see it more. You see the difference between a wind that meanders and one that rushes, between a bird flying home and one flying low. The grandmother nudges your elbow. That cloud, she says. It's just posing. No rain today. You believe her. The goat looks at you. You look back at the goat. It doesn't blink. You're not sure whether this is an ancient Zulu ritual or just a particularly intense staring contest, but either way, you're losing. It's early evening now, and you've spent the entire day with your host grandmother and her friends, walking the dusty footpaths between homes, learning the less documented but deeply felt art of atmospheric listening. Not listening to a radio, listening to the world. The thing is, weather forecasting here is less about sky gazing and more about earth whispering. You sit by a cracked, sun-warmed stone wall as the grandmothers gather in a semicircle around an old pot. There's nothing cooking in it, but that doesn't seem to matter. One of them pokes the air and says, "Smell that?" You lean in. All you get is goat. "No, child," another says kindly. "Not the goat. The wind? That's your lesson tonight. Wind gossip." According to local tradition, different types of wind carry different personalities and forecasts. A hot, dry wind from the northeast. Just being dramatic. A slow, cool wind from the southwest. Pack up the laundry. It's about to pour. There are names for all of them, but they're hard to translate directly. One is called Umoya Onenkani, literally, the wind with attitude. That one usually means rain, and probably trouble at the community council meeting, too. You're beginning to see that weather, in this context, is a full-body experience. It's not just about what's falling from the sky. It's about what's moving through the land, through the trees, through your skin. The grandmothers recount stories of their younger days when they'd lay flat on the red earth and listen, not with their ears, but with their bones. You feel the thunder coming through the ground before you hear it, one of them says, especially the real storms, the ones that pull the sky in half. She describes one that came in 1964, how the birds vanished, the dogs hid, and even the insects went quiet. How all the men said it would pass. How all the grandmothers started boiling water, just in case. Of course, the storm didn't pass. It slammed. And it was the grandmothers who saved most of the maize that season. You ask whether that kind of intuition is still passed down. They pause. Then one of them, tall, with silver braids tucked into her shawl, nods slowly. It is. But the young people need to want to learn. This is not the kind of thing you teach in one afternoon. She's right. Even you, with all your enthusiasm and notepad full of wind names, are still mostly guessing. But that's the beauty of this kind of knowledge. It's layered. It doesn't come from explanation. It comes from repetition, from watching and waiting and being present long enough for the patterns to emerge. You're reminded of something one weather anthropologist once said. Indigenous weather prediction is not less scientific. It just works on a longer timeline. Of course, modern meteorology has its own strengths: satellite imaging, Doppler radar, numerical models. But those tools often can't pick up micro shifts, like the exact moment a drought breaks in this exact village. The goats and winds, meanwhile, they're always watching. There's a pause as one grandmother stands, stretches, and looks toward the hills. "The clouds are flirting again," she says. You all turn to look, and yes, there they are, those thick, teasing clouds, hovering but not committing. A little like you, perhaps. You're still figuring out whether this knowledge is real or not, whether it fits into your understanding of science, whether that goat knows something you don't. But as the wind changes direction and carries the scent of wet stone, you stop thinking. You just feel. Night comes quietly in KwaZulu-Natal. No dramatic sunset, just a slow draining of color. like someone gently dimming the whole world. You're sitting on a woven mat now, barefoot, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of smoke and eucalyptus. The stars are coming out in clumps, and the grandmothers have begun their nighttime ritual, imishimbi, yamayeza, the ceremony of calming herbs. Tonight's focus? Lavender and onions. Yes, onions. You watch as your host, let's call her Gogo Zanele, unfolds a pouch made of soft, tanned leather. Inside are dried petals, crumpled leaves, and tiny bundles tied with twine. She speaks softly as she places each one into a steaming bowl of water, explaining their purpose not like a pharmacist, but like a poet. This one, she says, holding up a pinch of crushed lavender, is for chasing restless dreams. She drops it into the bowl, a soft hiss, a rush of scent. And this one, she continues, lifting a small slice of white onion, is for stubborn thoughts, especially the ones that come at 2 a.m. You raise an eyebrow. Why onion, you ask. She smiles without answering, just gestures for you to lean in and inhale. It smells strange, not unpleasant. Sharp, yes, but also comforting, in a way you can't explain. A little like soup, a little like safety. The grandmothers call it ukufa fumula, breathing through the storm. Turns out, aromatics play a huge role in traditional Zulu sleep practices, not as medicine in the Western sense, but as atmosphere, tools to nudge the body toward stillness. Lavender calms the skin and heart. Crushed wild basil, burned on a small dish, is believed to clear away not just bad air, but bad energy. And onions? Onions, when steamed or sliced and placed under the bed, are thought to absorb night heat, that restlessness that keeps you flipping your pillow to the cool side. Some modern scientists are starting to pay attention to this, by the way. Studies on lavender oil show promising results for anxiety and mild insomnia. But the onion trick, that's still up for debate. Some call it folklore. Others point to sulfur compounds and placebo effects. And of course, some historians argue that the tradition has roots not in sleep at all, but in protection rituals meant to ward off spirits. Nobody agrees. Everyone has a theory. Classic academia. But for now, none of that matters, because you're lying on your back, warm and still, with the faint smell of sweet herbs in the air and the rhythmic chatter of crickets nearby. Gogo Zanele hums an old lullaby under her breath, something about rain and goats and waiting. And slowly, with no effort at all, you begin to feel the weight of the day drift off your shoulders. Your body knows this rhythm, even if your brain is still catching up. You close your eyes. You listen to the wind. You dream of onions. Morning in the village doesn't come with alarm clocks. It begins with goats. You hear them first, soft bleats, the shuffle of hooves, and the occasional indignant snort as one tries to steal another's breakfast. The sun hasn't quite cleared the hills yet, but the light is gray and promising. You sit up slowly on your mat, rubbing your eyes and wondering, how on earth did grandmothers figure out goats could predict the weather? Turns out it wasn't random. Over generations, Zulu women, especially the elders, developed a quiet but incredibly detailed understanding of how animals behave before a weather shift. Goats were particularly reliable, not because they're magical, though some grannies might argue they are, but because they're sensitive to air pressure, to scent changes, to static in the atmosphere. You follow Gogo Zanele outside as she does her daily check. No thermometers, no apps, just goats. She squints at a small brown one chewing on grass a bit too quickly. That one's jumpy today, she murmurs. Rain's coming. You're skeptical, but the sky does look suspiciously heavy in the distance. The old women never kept written records. Their data was passed down in whispers, songs, and gestures. They noticed when the goats started gathering together earlier than usual, or when they bleated more, or less, or not at all. One famous sign: when a goat refuses to eat certain herbs, it usually devours. That meant lightning could be coming. And it wasn't just goats. Chickens cluck differently. Dogs dig shallow holes and sleep in them. Certain birds vanish entirely before a storm. It's a whole language of fur and feathers, and the grandmothers were fluent. In fact, historians now think these observational systems may have formed the basis of early southern African weather calendars. Not formal ones, but practical ones. The kind where you knew to plant maize a week early because the goats hadn't been sleeping well. Naturally, this knowledge was undervalued for centuries. Western scientists arriving in the 1800s dismissed it as superstition and women's tales. Some even tried to ban local weather predictions, claiming only colonial authorities should issue warnings. The irony? Colonial forecasts often failed, while Gogo Zanele's goats were rarely wrong. Today, some ethnometeorologists, yes, that's a real field, are trying to reconstruct these ancestral systems before they vanish. They visit villages, record interviews with elders, and chart behavioral patterns of livestock, hoping to translate intuition into data. Of course, some people roll their eyes at the idea. Goats as meteorologists, they say. But you're starting to see it differently, because as you watch Gogo Zanele lean down and whisper something to her goat, a goat that promptly sneezes and trots away, it's clear there's something going on here, something you can't quite measure with a satellite. And when, exactly an hour later, the first raindrop lands on your forehead, you stop doubting her entirely. The rain doesn't arrive like a dramatic drum roll. It tiptoes in. First a hush. Even the chickens pause. Then the softest drizzle, like someone is gently brushing your shoulders with mist. You pull a shawl tighter around yourself and watch the landscape darken into the kind of rich, earthy green you didn't think was possible just 10 minutes ago. This is when Gogo Zanele does something curious. She begins to hum. It's not a lullaby or a modern tune, it's an old Zulu weather chant. No lyrics, just sound and rhythm. You lean in to hear it better, and she glances at you with a tiny smile, as if to say, yes, the goats were right again. But the song helps too. This brings you to one of the more fascinating pieces of Southern African meteorological wisdom. Rituals and songs weren't just symbolic, they were tools. And no, not in a magical thinking way. Many anthropologists now argue these communal chants and ceremonies served practical, almost neurological functions. Take the rain-calling songs, for example. They weren't just expressions of hope. They helped synchronize breath, soothe collective anxiety, and quite literally brought people's nervous systems into alignment with nature. A group singing under the clouds becomes calmer, more focused. If you think about it, that's its own kind of preparation for unpredictable weather. The melodies, too, sometimes mimicked nature itself. High notes mirrored birdsong, or the chirp of insects before a storm. Deep tones echoed thunder. The idea was to harmonize with the atmosphere, a sort of acoustic handshake with the sky. Gogo Zanele stops humming for a moment to adjust the firewood under a boiling pot. Then she gestures for you to sit beside her. You must learn to hear what rain says, she tells you. It doesn't shout, it sings. There's an elegance in that, in seeing weather not as enemy or inconvenience, but as conversation. And in this worldview, old women aren't just caretakers. They're interpreters of nature's quietest messages. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Some researchers suggest these traditions might have neurological effects on the elderly themselves. Participating in these weather rituals, especially as leaders, gives structure, identity, and meaning. It's a kind of cognitive preservation. Studies done in other indigenous communities show lower rates of age-related decline when elders maintain active cultural roles like this. In other words, rain doesn't just water the crops, it nourishes memory. You sit quietly under the eaves, listening to Gogo's hums returning, softer now, blending with the patter of rain and the occasional bleat from a goat who really doesn't care for puddles. The smell of wet earth, wood smoke, and stew fills the air. Somewhere far away, satellites are spinning and beeping, trying to tell someone that a storm has arrived. But here, all it took was a goat, a song, and a woman who remembered the sky's language. When the rain stops, it doesn't really stop. It sort of lingers. The air feels thicker, like the sky forgot to exhale. Puddles reflect a silver-gray light. The goats have stopped their dramatic pacing and settled under the avocado trees, looking pleased with themselves, as if they summoned the clouds, not Gogo Zanele. You and Gogo begin walking along the slope behind the hut, where the soil is damp and the aloe plants seem to have perked up overnight. She stops, bends down, and picks up a flat, reddish stone. "You see this?" she asks, holding it up to the light. "If it turns darker, we'll get more rain. If it stays pale, it was just a passing visitor." You raise an eyebrow. It sounds like superstition, until you remember how many of these superstitions have quietly outperformed official forecasts. This chapter is about rocks, plants, insects, and all the other things that Zulu grandmothers used to read like weather reports. In some parts of KwaZulu-Natal, people use the flowering patterns of the mfefo plant, a kind of wild sage, to predict humidity and storm cycles. If it bloomed early, it meant dry heat. Late bloom? Prepare for sticky, electric weather. Ants played a role too. If certain black ants started constructing little earthen barricades across paths, people would prepare for flooding. And when termites abandoned their mounds in mass, time to double-check the roof. It gets weirder. There was a kind of local fungus that appeared on bark before certain kinds of rainstorms. Elders knew not just what it looked like, but smelled like. A sharp, earthy note that meant thunder wouldn't be far behind. Even cattle behavior fed into the model. If cows clustered tightly and refused to graze, it wasn't laziness. It was their internal barometer twitching. Modern-day meteorologists, when interviewed about these techniques, often smile politely. It's not quantifiable, they say, and they're not wrong, but they're also missing something. Pattern recognition doesn't always need numbers. Sometimes it needs stories. A lifetime of stories, strung together like beads, each one anchoring a moment when the sky did this and the goat did that, and your grandmother told you exactly what it meant. You ask Gogo if she remembers when she first learned these signs. She laughs. "No one teaches you," she says. "You just live with it long enough, and one day you wake up knowing." You continue your walk as mist rises off the grass. Every step you take feels quieter, like nature is still whispering something, and you're just beginning to learn how to listen. By late afternoon, the sky clears into a muted, powdery blue. The goats are calm. The soil breathes steam. And Gogo Zanele hands you a bowl of warm maize porridge with honeybush tea. "To keep your throat good for weather stories," she says with a wink. But now she wants to show you something. She leads you to a shaded part of the compound where an old wooden trunk sits under a canvas tarp. When she opens it, the smell of beeswax, dried herbs, and aged paper hits you like an ancestral breeze. Inside are weather charms. Yes, charms, not trinkets or tourist souvenirs, but handmade talismans that Zulu women like Gogo crafted and passed down to predict and even influence the weather. There's a goat hair braid tied with river stones used to call calming winds after a hailstorm. There's a gourd painted with ash and turmeric, shaken softly when crops need gentle rain. One pouch contains crushed acacia bark and the wing of a moth, for fog, she says, completely serious. To you, it might feel like folklore, but here, magic and meteorology are less like opposites and more like roommates. You ask if she believes these objects really work. She narrows her eyes at you, smiles, and asks, "Did you sleep well last night?" You nod. She shrugs. Then maybe one of them did its job. These charms weren't just made by anyone. Grandmothers, especially the oldest women in the village, were often seen as weather intermediaries, part healer, part historian, part cloud whisperer. Their charm-making combined knowledge of plants, animal behavior, dreams, even the alignment of stars. In fact, Zulu lunar calendars tracked more than just months. They tracked moods of the earth. When the moon leaned left, a crescent opening east, certain charms were hung in doorways. When it tilted right, other rituals were paused. There's very little written documentation of these customs. Some of the only records we have come from colonial-era journals, most dismissive, others bewildered. One missionary wrote that he witnessed a woman singing to a pumpkin and causing a storm. He probably didn't understand that the song was a weather map, the pumpkin a symbol of fertility and storage, and the storm was expected, not summoned. Historians still debate whether these practices were symbolic, functional, or a psychological comfort, but the community never cared about academic boxes. To them, if it helped the rain come, or stay away, it worked. Gogo lets you hold one of the older charms. It's soft with age, wrapped in blue-dyed cotton, and faintly smells of burnt wood. Try shaking it, she says. You do. Nothing happens. But then again, the clouds overhead seem to sigh. Maybe that's enough. The evening deepens, and the sky slips into that rich indigo color that makes firelight look like gold. You sit by the low flames again, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Gogo Zanele is now in storyteller mode, voice softer, rhythm slower, as if she's speaking not just to you, but to the night itself. Tonight's tale is not about people. It's about ants. Yes, ants. But not just any ants. Black harvester ants, locally called Izinlansana. According to generations of weather watchers in this region, these tiny creatures are some of the best long-term weather predictors you'll ever meet. Better than the radio, Gogo says, clicking her tongue. You raise your eyebrows. She nods. It turns out Zulu weather folklore gave great respect to insects, not as nuisances, but as meteorological consultants. And ants had a special place. If the black harvester ants built their mounds high and wide before the first summer rain, it was a sure sign of a wet season ahead. If they stayed low, building shallow tunnels and not bothering with deep chambers, the season was expected to be dry. Even more fascinating, they'd start adjusting their architecture weeks before the first cloud appeared. And once you noticed them carrying seeds deeper underground, it meant storms were coming, possibly with flooding. The question is, how? Modern entomologists have tried to understand this. One theory suggests ants can detect subtle shifts in barometric pressure, or pick up changes in soil moisture and electromagnetic fields. Some researchers say it's still anecdotal. Others argue The ants may be reacting to things humans can't even sense. You look at the trail of ants near your feet, moving with purpose, and you wonder if they already know what tomorrow holds. This relationship with insects isn't limited to ants, though. Termite mounds were also studied, not for building materials, but for their thermal regulation patterns. Zulu farmers would note when termite hills were unusually warm at night. It was thought to predict cold snaps a few days later. Bees, too, had their role. If honeybees clustered thickly on tree bark in the early evening, locals believed a humid night and light showers would follow. If they stayed dispersed, no rain. Some of this, of course, might just be coincidence. But as Gogo says, coincidence that repeats itself for 100 years, that's called a pattern. There's a kind of grounded logic in all this. Rather than reading graphs or checking satellites, traditional observers simply paid close attention to the land, the animals, the air, the ants. It wasn't mystical. It was relational. You weren't forecasting at nature. You were listening with it. And as you sit quietly by the fire, the crackling wood the only sound, you feel that difference. Not as a scientist, not as a tourist, but as someone who, even just for tonight, is learning to read the ground with new eyes. You wake up earlier than usual, not to birdsong, but to the low, distant hum of drums, soft, steady, like a heartbeat muffled by mist. Gogo Zanele explains between sips of tea, today is a naming day. You blink, still groggy. Like babies? She grins. Not just babies. Storms, winds, even clouds get names here. And just like that, you've entered one of the most poetic chapters of Zulu weather lore, the naming rituals. In Zulu cosmology, to name something is not just to label it. It's to understand it, to give it place and meaning. That's why different kinds of rain have different names, some gentle and nurturing, others violent or deceptive. For example, Imvula Yokuthambisa, the blessing rain, soft and steady, usually the first rains of summer. Isichotho, hail, considered a disrespectful visitor that damages crops and refuses to knock. Umlotha, literally ashes, used to describe a ghostly fog that steals visibility and makes travelers lose their way. Each term carries emotion, memory, personality. People speak of rain the way you'd talk about a distant cousin or a moody neighbor. Clouds, too, are categorized by mood. A sky full of amafu amahle, the beautiful clouds, usually brings relief after heat. But amafu amathunzi, shadow clouds, tend to be watched with narrowed eyes. They're sneaky, pretend they'll rain, never do. Wind gets its own poetic treatment. A strong, dry gust from the northeast is Umoya Wamadlozi, the ancestor's breath. It's not feared, but acknowledged with respect. It means they're nearby, Zanele whispers. This system might sound whimsical, but it's a highly functional form of meteorological literacy. By using specific, vivid names, even illiterate members of the community could pass on precise weather information orally. It's not, there was a storm, it's, the sky brought Umoya Wokhathi, the pregnant wind that always precedes heavy rain. Linguists today admire this as an early form of oral environmental taxonomy, a naming system so local and consistent that it functions like a field guide. It's not just about what the weather does, it's about how the weather feels. You learn that children were taught these words, not from textbooks, but through stories and songs. Every time a child mimicked thunder with a rolled drumbeat, or imitated mist by dancing silently around a hut, they were memorizing weather codes without even realizing it. Some anthropologists now argue that this naming tradition could be seen as a form of emotional weather mapping, one that not only describes but humanizes the climate, And perhaps there's comfort in that. To feel the wind not as a threat, but as a conversation. To know that Imvula Yokuthambisa is not just a drizzle, but a promise. Tonight, when a soft rain begins tapping the thatched roof above you, you smile to yourself. It's not just rain, you now know her name. You're crouched near the fire again, stirring a pot of something that smells like smoked roots and damp bark. Gogo Zanele gives you a sideways glance. It's not stew, she says. It's the old way of calling the clouds. Tonight you learn that smoke was once a language, and scent a signal. In traditional Zulu weather practices, burning herbs and roots wasn't just for ceremony or scent. It was communication with the sky, with the spirits, with each other. The root you're holding, imfefo, is dry, knotted, and a bit dusty. It smells like sage's more mysterious cousin. You crumble it into the flames. The smoke spirals upward, curling into the night like it knows the way. Gogo explains, Imfefo is for calming. We burn it when the sky is restless. In modern terms, it might sound like superstition. But pause. When researchers studied rural southern African communities, they discovered that burning specific local plants actually had insect-repelling and air-cleansing effects, creating more restful sleep environments during humid, restless seasons. So yes, it was spiritual, but also, in its own way, scientifically sensible. You learn that some families had their own smoke signatures, combinations of bark, leaves, or resin they'd burn to mark special weather events or prayers for rain. Neighbors could recognize these from afar, like a private weather telegram. Even more fascinating, some of the ingredients had mild sedative properties, calming not just the sky, but the people under it. You imagine a long-ago storm rolling in, thunder shaking the grass hut, and a family seated together, surrounded by soft, earthy smoke that makes eyelids heavy and hearts quiet. You add another pinch of intelletsi bark to the fire. Gogo leans in. This one's for clarity, she says, voice low. Some oral histories claim intelletsi smoke could influence dreams, and was used by elders to invite prophetic messages during sleep. Not everyone believed that, but still, nobody risked skipping it. And maybe that's the key to understanding Zulu weather traditions. Not as hard science, not as folklore, but as something in between. A technology of intuition, a system of peacekeeping, a way to speak to the sky when there were no satellites, no weather apps, just memory, rhythm, scent, and silence. As the fire dies down, you lie back on the woven mat. Your skin is warm from the smoke. The scent of imfefo lingers on your shirt like an old lullaby. Above you, clouds shuffle across the stars, slow, soft, and just a little sleepy. You wake to the soft crackle of dawn light against thatched roof. Outside, dew clings to the tall grass, and somewhere, a rooster tries its best impression of a trumpet solo. It's morning in the veld, and your training in weather watching isn't over yet. Today, Gogo wants you to watch the cows. Yes, cows. You're a little confused. You thought maybe clouds or birds or something. Less muddy. But she hands you a stool and points to the pasture. Just sit, watch, you'll see. So you do. At first, it's just cows chewing, then more chewing, then a tail swat, then something interesting. A few of the cows, only the older ones, start bunching together, huddling in the same corner of the field, facing the same direction. Rain's coming, Gogo says, without even looking. They always know first. You raise an eyebrow. Really? But later, as clouds gather on the horizon, you remember what she told you. The cows feel the shift before we do. It's in their ears, their skin, their gut. You think of modern meteorologists glued to barometers and Doppler radars. And here's a cow just standing there, already in sync with the sky. And it's not just Zulu herders who noticed. Across rural southern Africa, cows, and sometimes even goats or donkeys, were observed closely for weather cues. If they refused to graze, thunder might be on the way. If they lay down all at once, storm. If they faced into the wind, probably cold rain. A 20th century ethnographer once wrote, "The best weather forecaster in Zululand isn't a priest or a chief. It's a cow with a twitchy tail." You laugh softly to yourself, but you don't doubt it. In some villages, kids were even taught cattle-watching songs, little melodies to sing while observing herd behavior. The rhythm helped them remember subtle cues and pass them down. And here's a fun twist. Some of those songs mimic the rhythm of approaching storms. Boom, boom, pause. Boom. You hum one under your breath, and it weirdly fits the low rumble in the distance. Gogo claps her hands. You're learning. Tonight, we'll test your skills. You glance at the horizon. The clouds are growing, and the wind has turned. The cows shift again. They're walking away from the wind now, slow, steady, no panic, just moving. You feel it too, that quiet shift in pressure, like the earth is taking a deep breath, and so are you. This isn't folklore, you realize. This is lived science, passed down through hooves and hums, the kind of meteorology that can't be taught in books, only in time and watching. You stand up, brushing grass from your legs, and you say what Gogo said this morning, testing it out for yourself. Rain's coming. The rain never roars in like a movie storm. Instead, it begins with a hush. You're sitting under a wide fig tree, cup of fermented sorghum porridge in hand, watching the sky melt from silver to soft gray. All around, the veld still hums with bird chatter and insect clicks. But there's a strange stillness in the air, like the land is bracing, but also welcoming. The goats have vanished. They've gone to hide, Gogo explains, not even looking up from her embroidery. Smart ones? They don't like to get their hooves muddy. You chuckle, but then remember, this is part of the system too. The goat's retreat is a signal. According to traditional knowledge, the speed at which goats seek shelter and how far they go tells you the type of rain to expect. Just a drizzle? They'll stay close. A real soaking? They'll disappear into the thickest thorn bush. Today, they bolted to the opposite hill, so you wait. Gogo sings under her breath, a lullaby to the storm gods, or maybe just a tune to pass the time. Her voice is low, half spoken, half hummed. The song names the winds in Zulu, one by one, like she's greeting old friends. Umoya ofolile, umoya onomsindo, the cool breeze, the angry wind, and when the first fat drop lands on your knee, it's like punctuation. Suddenly, the rhythm shifts. The rain falls not in a rush, but in a steady, measured beat. You count the time between drops, remembering what Gogo told you. The closer the beats, the shorter the storm. If they're lazy and wide apart, it might last all day. There's something deeply calming about this in a forecast. It's not built on radar scans or satellite loops. It's sensory, grounded, patient. And yet, historians today still argue, was it really accurate? Was this just coincidence or a placebo of the pastoral life? But sitting here, wrapped in a shawl, feet dry, cup warm, you're not in the mood for academic debates. You're in the mood for magic. Magic and the soft tap of water on earth. You look up. The clouds swirl gently like someone stirring porridge in a giant bowl. The smell of wet soil curls into your nose, rich, almost peppery. Petrichor, modern science calls it. But Gogo has a better name, the kiss of the ancestors. She smiles. They say when it smells strong like this, the rains are good. The crops will be happy. That smell, by the way, it's actually caused by geosmin, a compound released by soil bacteria when rain hits dry earth. But no one here talks about that. They just breathe it in like perfume from another world. You lean back, head against the tree, letting the rain sing its gentle rhythm. For a moment, time folds. You're in 1850 or 2025, doesn't matter. The rain, the goats, the fig tree, none of them care about calendars. It's just weather, doing what it's always done. You realize that's the real power of traditional weather wisdom. It doesn't predict just for the sake of control. It tells stories, guides choices, connects you to others, people, animals, clouds. And in the end, that might be more reliable than any 5-day forecast. You think the storm has passed, but in Zulu tradition, you never assume too soon. The goats haven't come back yet. So you and Gogo stay under the tree a little longer, sipping from the now slightly rain-diluted porridge. She offers you a piece of biltong, dried meat tough as bark and just as salty, and taps your shoulder with her knuckles. "Watch," she whispers. In the distance, a small spiral of dust rises. It's not much, just a twist of air and earth, maybe 5 feet high. But Gogo's eyes narrow. "The little devils are dancing again," she mutters. You've seen dust devils before, but Gogo treats them like unexpected guests. According to her, their movement isn't random. "They show you where the storm still lingers," she says. "If it moves east, more rain comes. If it fades quickly, the sky has said all it wants to say. This particular spiral flutters, then collapses." "She's shy," Gogo nods. "That's good. Means we can walk." You stretch your legs, already a little stiff from sitting. The ground squelches underfoot, soft but not soaked. Along the edge of the homestead, you spot small figures running. Children chasing frogs from puddles, their laughter echoing. "Don't step on the gaugus," someone yells. In Zulu, that means bugs. But today it might mean rain beetles. Yes, beetles. Another unassuming forecasting tool. You learn quickly that when shiny black rain beetles emerge from underground in groups, it signals a second, heavier wave of rain. Their appearance is a natural alarm clock, centuries old and surprisingly accurate. Of course, entomologists explain it differently. Humidity changes, soil temperature, mating triggers, but Gogo simply says, "They know before we do." You bend down to see one up close. Its shell glints like obsidian, tiny antennae twitching as if tuning into something just beyond human hearing. It pauses, then scuttles back toward the damp undergrowth. Nature's Morse code, right there in the grass. Then comes the low thunder. Not dramatic, just a long, lazy rumble, like the sky stretching after a nap. Gogo doesn't flinch. "She's just turning over," she murmurs, half to herself. As you walk, she explains something else. The names of the clouds. Not cirrus or cumulus. No, these clouds have names like people, intimate, local, and very much alive. That one, she says, pointing to a flat gray ceiling, is Unomathemba. She brings steady rain, but always leaves quietly. It means Mother of Hope. You've never thought of a cloud as someone you could talk to, or miss, or rely on. But here, they are part of the community. And suddenly, you remember. Weather is not just meteorology here. It's memory. It's storytelling. When someone says, "Remember the rains of '73, they're not just talking about puddles. They mean births, deaths, a good maize harvest, a wedding that almost didn't happen. In this world, you don't just live under the weather, you live with it. And it lives with you. That night, under a patchy sky, you can't sleep. not because of noise or discomfort, but because the air is so full of quiet detail. Every cricket chirp feels deliberate. Every breeze through the thatched roof seems to carry a message. Gogo snores lightly, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of herbs and smoke. Outside, the goats are still silent. No bells, no shuffles. You don't need a forecast. You just know it's not over yet. At sunrise, the air smells like wet bark and cooked maize. The goats are back, shaking droplets from their ears like sleepy dogs. You rise quietly, careful not to wake Gogo, and step outside. The world is glazed with dew. Every leaf, every blade of grass glints as if painted by a meticulous artist. A rooster crows somewhere behind the hut, not dramatically, more like a rusty hinge yawning. You stretch, your back sore from the unfamiliar bedroll, and you wonder how Gogo sleeps on these woven mats every night and still walks upright. You spot her near the fire pit, stirring embers back to life with a bundle of twigs. "Didn't hear the goats come back," she says, not looking up. "They came quietly," you say. "Good sign." She doesn't elaborate. Instead, she hands you a metal cup. The tea inside is black, bitter, and steaming, like a small volcano. You take a sip and feel it melt the sleep from your mouth. This morning, Gogo wants to show you the last part of her method. The step she says you can't learn unless you've lived here a while. She calls it listening to the ancestors. Now, don't panic. It's not as mystical as it sounds. Or maybe it is. Depends on how you define listening. She leads you to a stone ring behind the main hut. Each stone is placed with intention. This one is for my father. That one for my mother. That flat one was my grandmother's favorite. You stand in the center. Gogo claps her hands once, sharp, clear, then again, and again. 4 times. Silence. Then the birds answer. No, really. A flock of starlings swoops low, filling the air with a symphony of clicks and chirps. Gogo listens, nods. They're flying east. Rain's moving that way. We'll have sun this afternoon. You squint. It still looks like soup up there. She grins. Sky lies. Birds don't. You file that away. What fascinates you most is that none of this is written down. There's no official Zulu meteorology handbook, no diagrams, no satellite models, just rhythm and story and shared memory passed mouth to mouth like fire in the dark. Later that morning, before you leave, Gogo gives you something. It's a tiny goat bell, rusted, with a faded red string. Hang it on your doorknob, she says. If it rings on a still night, rain's coming, or someone's trying to visit. You're not sure whether she means someone living or not. You don't ask. Back in your world, traffic, screens, digital weather alerts, Gogo's lessons feel both oddly magical and deeply practical. You check your phone's forecast for fun. Partly cloudy, 10% chance of rain. You glance at the bell. It's still, but you swear, somewhere deep in your ear, you hear a faint ting. And you smile, because now you know. Sometimes the best meteorologists are grandmothers. And goats. The night has deepened now. Maybe you're already drifting. Maybe your eyes are half closed, or you're watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling, soft and slow. Let them stretch. Let them blur. You've walked through misty fields. You've heard goats whisper secrets to the wind. You've sat beside a grandmother who doesn't need radar to know when rain will kiss the earth. You've felt the rhythm of a culture that reads the sky like a poem. And now, it's okay to let go. No more questions. No more notes to take. Just breathe, the kind of breath that comes from quiet fields and rustling leaves. from cups of tea sipped beside a crackling fire, from bells that may or may not ring. Wherever you are, whatever city, whatever time, know this: you're not alone. There's always a story waiting, and someone, somewhere, gently telling it. Tonight, that someone is me. Good night.